In the Middle Ages, Christianity was the primary religion, and in the video game The Legend of Zelda, there actually is a cross on Link's shield, which can imply that Christianity apparently was the intended religion in The Legend of Zelda. The cathedral in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time does represent that of a medieval cathedral. The cathedrals in the Middle Ages were made of stone, and each individual stone was cut with precision. All of these cathedrals did have a Roman arch right there in the front that did support everything in the cathedral. Inside, there were stained glass windows as well as arches, and there were usually 4 bays. These 4 bays were 4 vertical repeated units inside the structure, which this cathedral does demonstrate. In the Middle Ages, taverns and inns actually brought in really big business for local towns, and they were actually a large part of the economic structure of that town. Inns are featured in some of the Legend of Zelda titles like this one. Inns usually featured really long hallways. These inns also had accommodations for the innkeeper to stay in. These inns had storage rooms as well as boxes. Innkeepers were usually really wealthy, which would explain why they wore nicer clothing. There was always a kitchen as well as a kitchen table. The Middle Ages was also a time whenever locks became more common. Although the lower classmen still wore cheaper material, in The Legend of Zelda you do see a lot of colorful clothing, which is because dyes at this time were being introduced and colorful clothing was more common. Farms are also featured in some of the Legend of Zelda titles, and Lon Lon Ranch is a great example of rural living. Their business was raising horses, which at this time was a replacement of human labor. Outside towns also relied on farms to get their food from. And in the Middle Ages, horses were also a great means of transportation. The weaponry in The Legend of Zelda was really similar to that of the Middle Ages. Bows and arrows, as well as hammers, were very common weapons. Anyone who had a sword also needed a shield, which was a very important piece of a knight's armor, as well as, Link's. Slingshots were also a very common weapon. Wind Waker also features a lot of similar weaponry as well. We see the hammer again, as well as the bow and arrow, but also the boomerang is featured as well, which was a common weapon. Link could definitely be considered a knight. Somehow, he always seems to find a sword in some magical, mysterious way. And much like a knight, he has a sword. Much like a knight, Link's primary source of defense is his shield and his sword. And also like a knight, he does need to have training to use his sword. Hyrule and King Arthur's Land are very similar. First of all, they do both have very close-knit cities and towns. King Arthur's Land also features many different regions, like a forest region. There were also many lakes and rivers. Hyrule almost always has a desert region as well. There are also usually mountains like King Arthur's Land. Knights are usually featured in every Legend of Zelda game. They're usually featured guarding or protecting something. Also, I noticed in particular in Skyward Sword that was actually the first time they'd featured chainmail really detailed. In Skyward Sword, you're actually training to be a knight. To the left, it actually says Knight Academy. In the Middle Ages, it wasn't common for people to venture outside the town, and I noticed that in Clock Town, in Majora's Mask, the knights are always guarding people from leaving the outside of the town. In The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, that's the first time that we start to see ships brought into the game's series. The pirate ship in this game does have a lot of features of a medieval pirate ship. There's a top castle, a bowsprit, a mainsail, and a gun port on the side of the ship as well. The Middle Ages also featured some dark art. They usually demonstrated this dark art in their ceramics and their mosaics, and the features were usually very muted, absent colors. Twilight Princess in particular does have similar features to that dark artwork due to the absent colors in this game, even during gameplay.